March 24, 1945. 30,000 feet over Berlin, a formation of American B-17 flying fortresses approaches the Reich capital, the most heavily defended target in Europe. German fighter pilots scramble to intercept. Among them, veterans who have shot down dozens of Allied aircraft. They spot the bombers and prepare their attack runs. Then they see something that makes them hesitate. Red tails. The American escort fighters have red-painted tails. Some German pilots have learned to recognize these markings. They know what red tails mean. They radio warnings to other fighters. Rote Schwänze, die Schwarzen, red tails. The black pilots. Some German pilots break off their attacks before engaging. They've fought these pilots before. They know what happens when you underestimate the red tails. This is the story of the Tuskegee Airmen, the only fighter group in the entire United States Army Air Forces that never lost a bomber to enemy fighters. Not one bomber. In over 200 missions. Let me tell you how that happened. And let me tell you why the Army tried to hide it for decades. Let's start at the beginning. 1925. The United States Army War College publishes a study titled, "The Use of Negro Manpower in War." The conclusion is clear and wrong. The study claims black men lack the intelligence, emotional stability, and physical coordination required for aviation. The study recommends that the Army Air Corps should not waste resources training black pilots. This is not the opinion of a few prejudiced officers. This is official United States Army policy, based on what the Army claims is scientific research. The study will be used for the next 16 years to justify excluding black Americans from aviation training. But there's a problem with the Army's conclusion. Black Americans are already flying. Civilian flying clubs exist in major cities. Black pilots own their own aircraft. They compete in air races. They perform aerobatic demonstrations. They prove, repeatedly, that black men can fly as well as anyone. The Army ignores this evidence. The policy remains in place, 1939. War breaks out in Europe. The United States begins expanding its military in preparation for possible involvement. The Army Air Corps needs pilots. Thousands of them. Applications pour in from young men eager to fly. Among them, applications from black Americans. All rejected. The official policy has not changed. The Army maintains black men cannot be pilots. But pressure is building. The NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, launches a campaign demanding that the Army Air Corps accept black pilot trainees. Black newspapers across the country publish editorials criticizing the exclusion. Civil rights organizations lobby Congress, and some members of Congress begin asking uncomfortable questions. If America is preparing to oppose fascism and racial supremacy in Europe, how can the American military practice racial discrimination at home? 1940. The Selective Training and Service Act becomes law. For the first time, the draft legislation includes a clause prohibiting discrimination based on race. It's a weak clause, easily circumvented, but it's something. The Army is required to accept black volunteers and draftees, but it can still segregate them, and it does. Black soldiers are assigned to separate units, commanded by white officers, and generally given support roles rather than combat assignments. The Army Air Corps, under pressure from Congress and civil rights groups, announces it will create a training program for black pilots. But there's a catch. The program will be completely segregated. Black pilot trainees will train at a separate facility with separate instructors using separate aircraft. They will not train alongside white pilots. They will not share facilities with white pilots. And if they complete training, they will serve in segregated squadrons. The Army selects Tuskegee, Alabama as the location for this training program. Tuskegee Institute, a historically black college, has experience in aviation training. The Army builds a new airfield, Tuskegee Army Airfield, adjacent to the college. Construction begins in 1941. The first class of aviation cadets arrives in July 1941. 13 men. They will be trained as military pilots, navigators, bombardiers, and support personnel. The standards are identical to those at white pilot training facilities. The washout rate is expected to be high. The Army expects most of these men to fail. The assumption is that the experiment will prove the Army's original position correct. The Army believes black men cannot be trained as military pilots. The instructors are a mix of black civilian pilots and white Army officers. The chief flight instructor is Charles Alfred Anderson, a black pilot known as Chief. Anderson learned to fly in the 1920s when no flight school would accept black students. He taught himself, bought his own plane, and became one of the most experienced pilots in the country. He has more flight hours than most Army instructors. The Army is skeptical of Anderson's qualifications, but they need someone who knows how to fly and is willing to work in a segregated program. Anderson accepts the position because he believes in the mission. He believes these young men can fly. He's determined to prove the Army wrong. The training is brutal. Not because the instructors are harder on black cadets than white instructors are on white cadets, but because the cadets know they're being watched. They know the Army expects them to fail. They know that every mistake will be used as evidence that black men cannot fly. They cannot afford to be average. They must be exceptional. The pressure is enormous. Primary flight training lasts 9 weeks. Cadets learn basic flight skills in PT-17 Stearman biplanes. Takeoffs, landings, climbs, descents, turns. Then basic aerobatics, loops, rolls, spins. The instructors are demanding. Mistakes mean washout. Of the first class of 13 cadets, only 5 complete primary training. The Army sees this as confirmation of their expectations. 60% failure rate. Exactly what they predicted. But the 5 who survive continue to basic and advanced training. They transition to more powerful aircraft. BT-13 Valiants for basic training. 86 Texans for advanced training. They learn formation flying, navigation, instrument flight, gunnery. They learn everything white pilot trainees learn. In March 1942, 5 men graduate from the pilot training program at Tuskegee. They receive their silver wings and commissions as second lieutenants in the United States Army Air Forces. They are the first black military pilots in American history. Captain Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. leads the graduates. Davis is the son of Brigadier General Benjamin O. Davis, Sr., the first black general in the United States Army. Davis, Jr. graduated from West Point in 1936. He was the first black cadet at West Point in the 20th century. He endured 4 years of systematic ostracism. White cadets refused to speak to him except on official duty. He ate alone. He roomed alone. He studied alone. When he graduated, he ranked 35th in a class of 276. He requested assignment to the Army Air Corps. He was denied because of his race. Now, 6 years later, he's finally getting his wings. The 99th Pursuit Squadron, later redesignated the 99th Fighter Squadron, is activated at Tuskegee in March 1942. Davis assumes command. The squadron begins training with P-40 Warhawk fighters. The P-40 is not the most advanced fighter in the American inventory. It's been largely superseded by newer aircraft in the European and Pacific theaters. But it's what the 99th gets. The squadron trains for over a year at Tuskegee. Combat tactics, gunnery, formation flying, navigation, everything a fighter squadron needs. But there's a problem. The Army doesn't know what to do with them. A black fighter squadron. Where do you deploy them? Who commands them? How do you integrate them into existing air groups without violating segregation policies? The Army delays. The 99th remains at Tuskegee training and waiting. Political pressure mounts. Civil rights organizations demand that the squadron be sent to combat. Black newspapers run stories with headlines like, "When will our boys fly in combat?" The Army finally decides. The 99th will deploy to North Africa, April 1943. The 99th Fighter Squadron ships out to North Africa. They arrive in Morocco and are assigned to the 33rd Fighter Group, a white unit flying P-40s in support of ground operations in Tunisia. This is the moment the Army has been dreading. How will white pilots react to serving alongside black pilots? How will the black pilots perform in combat? The assumption among many officers is that the experiment will fail. The expectation is that black pilots will prove ineffective in combat. The squadron will be withdrawn, and the Army can return to its pre-war policy of excluding black pilots. The 99th flies its first combat mission on June 2nd, 1943. A coastal patrol over the Mediterranean. No enemy contact. June 4th. First enemy engagement. Lieutenant Charles Hall shoots down a German Focke-Wulf 190. The first aerial victory by a black pilot. Hall returns to base, lands, and calmly reports his achievement. The white pilots of the 33rd Fighter Group are skeptical. Some refuse to believe Hall actually shot down an enemy aircraft. The gun camera footage is reviewed. The victory is confirmed. Hall receives credit for one enemy aircraft destroyed. The 99th continues flying missions. Ground attack, escort, patrol. They accumulate experience. They accumulate victories. They lose pilots. Lieutenant Sherman White is taken down and lost on July 2nd. The first Tuskegee pilot lost in action. More will follow. September 1943. The Allies move into Italy at Salerno. The 99th provides air support during the operation. They fly multiple missions per day, striking German positions, guiding heavy aircraft, protecting Allied shipping. The squadron distinguishes itself during the Salerno landings, flying 175 missions in support of the campaign. They lose no pilots during this period, but back in the United States, criticism is building. White officers who served with the 99th write negative reports. They claim the black pilots are not bold enough. They claim the squadron's success rate is too low. They claim the pilots lack the necessary fighting spirit. These reports reach Washington. Army Air Force's leadership begins to question whether the Tuskegee experiment should continue. The criticism is not based on objective analysis. The 99th's performance metrics are actually comparable to white squadrons flying the same missions in the same theater. But perception matters more than reality. The Army is looking for a reason to end the program. Then something happens that changes the narrative. January 27, 1944. The 99th is escorting bombers heading toward the harbor at Anzio when they're met by German aircraft. What follows is one of the most intense air encounters of the Italian campaign. The Tuskegee pilots engage the Germans in a swirling clash. They bring down 12 opposing planes. The bombers complete their mission without loss. News of the engagement reaches the United States. Time magazine runs a story praising the 99th's performance. The negative narrative begins to shift. By early 1944, the Army has trained enough black pilots to form additional squadrons. The 101st, 102nd, and 301st Flight Squadrons are activated. These three squadrons, along with the 99th, are combined to form the 332nd Flight Group. Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., promoted from captain, assumes command. The 332nd is the only all-black flight group in the United States Army Air Forces. The 332nd deploys to Italy in early 1944. They are assigned to the 15th Air Force, which conducts strategic long-range operations deep into Germany and occupied Europe. The group initially flies P-39 Airacobras and P-47 Thunderbolts. Both are capable aircraft, but neither is ideal for long-range escort duties. Then, in July 1944, the 332nd receives P-51 Mustangs. The P-51 is the best American aircraft of the war. Long-range, fast, maneuverable, heavily equipped. With drop tanks, the Mustang can accompany bombers all the way to Berlin and back. And the 332nd paints their P-51s with distinctive markings. Red tails, red wingtips, red engine cowlings. They become known as the Red Tails or the Red Tail Angels. And the reason for the distinctive paint scheme is practical. In the chaos of aerial combat, bomber crews need to identify friendly planes quickly. The red tails are instantly recognizable, but the markings have an unintended consequence. German pilots also learn to recognize the red tails, and some German pilots learn to avoid them. The mission of an escort group is simple in concept, difficult in execution. Stay with the bombers. Protect them from enemy planes. Don't chase scores. Don't break formation to pursue fleeing opponents. Stay with the bombers. This doctrine is the opposite of pilot instincts. Pilots are assertive. They want to hunt. They want victories. The temptation to leave the bombers and chase an opposing plane is enormous. Many white pilot groups struggle with this discipline. Pilots see a German aircraft, pursue it, claim a success, and return to find the bomber formation under threat. The Tuskegee Airmen adopt a different philosophy. The mission is everything. Protecting the bombers is the mission. Personal glory is irrelevant. If the bombers get through and release their payload, the mission is successful. If a Tuskegee pilot never fires his guns but the bombers are safe, he's done his job. This philosophy is drilled into every pilot. Colonel Davis makes it clear. Your job is not to take down German planes. Your job is to ensure the bombers are not lost. If you can engage hostile planes without leaving the bombers unprotected, do it. If engaging means leaving the bombers, don't do it. The bombers always come first. This doctrine is unusual. It's contrary to the typical pilot culture, but it works. The 332nd begins flying escort missions in summer 1944. They escort B-17s and B-24s to targets across Germany, Austria, Czechoslovakia, Romania. The missions are long, often 6 to 8 hours in the air. The pilots fly in shifts, some close to the bombers, some flying higher cover, some flying sweep patterns ahead of the formation. They maintain this discipline even when German aircraft appear. Other American pilot groups have different tactics. They might break formation to meet German planes at distance. They might pursue fleeing ones. They prioritize scores. The Tuskegee Airmen prioritize protection, and bomber crews notice. By late 1944, bomber crews are requesting the red tails as escorts. Mission briefings include questions. Who's escorting us? When the answer is the 332nd, bomber crews relax. They know the red tails will stay with them. They know they'll get home. The reputation spreads. The red tail angels. The bombers' guardian angels. White bomber crews who might be prejudiced against black soldiers in other contexts trust these black pilots with their lives. They've seen the red tails in action. They know these pilots are the best escorts in the theater. The statistics support this. From June 1944 to April 1945, the 332nd flies over 200 escort missions. They encounter hostile planes on most of these missions. They engage in numerous air clashes. They take down German aircraft. And they never lose a bomber to hostile planes. Not one bomber. This record is unmatched by any other American escort group in the European theater. Let me be very clear about what this means. Other groups lose bombers. It's inevitable. Escorts cannot be everywhere at once. German planes sometimes break through. Bombers are lost. It happens. But not to bombers escorted by the red tails. The 332nd's perfect record is not luck. It's discipline. It's adherence to doctrine. It's the willingness to prioritize mission over glory. German pilots are skilled and determined. They employ sophisticated tactics. They approach from the sun, from above, from below. They try to draw escorts away from the bombers so other German planes can strike. These tactics work against most American escort groups. They don't work against the red tails. The Tuskegee pilots refuse to be drawn away. They maintain formation. They stay with the bombers. And the bombers survive. March 24th, 1945. The mission to Berlin. This is one of the longest and most dangerous escort missions of the war. The bombers are B-17s of the 5th Bombardment Wing. The target is a tank facility in Berlin. The round-trip distance is over 1,600 miles. The flight time will be over 7 hours. The bombers will face heavy ground fire over the target and aggressive air opposition along the route. The 332nd is assigned as primary escort. They launch from their base in Italy with a full complement of P-51 Mustangs, each carrying drop tanks for extended range. The formation climbs to altitude and heads north. The bombers join up, and the combined formation proceeds toward Germany. The first enemy contact comes over Austria. German Me-109s attempt to reach the bombers. The Red Tails intercept them. A brief air clash ensues. The German planes break off. No bombers are lost. The formation continues north. Over Czechoslovakia, more German planes. This time, Focke-Wulf 190s, faster and more heavily equipped than the Me-109s. They try to move in from above, descending through the bomber formation. The Red Tails climb to intercept. They meet the Germans before they reach the bombers. 3 German planes are taken down. The rest withdraw. Still no bombers lost. The formation continues. Berlin approaches. The ground fire intensifies. Anti-aircraft bursts fill the sky with dark clouds of smoke. The bombers maintain formation. The escorts cannot protect against ground fire. They can only stay with the bombers and ensure no planes exploit the confusion of the barrage to strike. German planes do attempt this. Me-262 jets, the newest and fastest planes in the Luftwaffe, descend toward the bombers. The P-51s cannot match the speed of the jets, but they can position themselves to block the approach runs. The jets pull away rather than face the Red Tails directly. The bombers reach the target, release their loads, and turn for home. The return flight is just as dangerous. Low on fuel, tired, the formation is vulnerable. German fighters attack again near the Czech border. The Red Tails are low on ammunition, but they engage anyway. They use their remaining ammunition carefully, firing only when they have clear shots. They conserve fuel by avoiding unnecessary maneuvers. They maintain discipline. The bombers make it back to Italy. All of them. Every single B-17 returned safely. 0 losses to enemy fighters. 0 losses to any cause. The mission is a complete success. The bomber crews debrief and specifically praise their escorts. The Red Tails saved us, one pilot reports. We saw German fighters all around, but they never got through. Those men earned their pay today. But back in the United States, the American public doesn't hear this story. The 332nd's achievements are not publicized. White newspapers rarely mention the Tuskegee Airmen. When they do, the coverage is minimal. The Army does not promote their success. Why? Because their success undermines the Army's pre-war position that black men cannot be effective combat pilots. If the Tuskegee Airmen are succeeding, if they're performing as well as or better than white pilots, then the entire justification for segregation collapses. The Army is caught in a contradiction. It needs pilots. The Tuskegee Airmen are excellent pilots. But acknowledging their excellence means admitting that racial segregation is based on prejudice, not performance. The solution is silence. Don't publicize their achievements. Don't give them high-profile awards. Let them do their job, but don't let the public know how well they're doing it. This policy continues through the end of the war. The 332nd flies missions until April 1945. They accumulate an impressive combat record. Over 15,000 sorties. 112 aerial victories confirmed. 150 German aircraft destroyed on the ground. Numerous ground targets destroyed. And that perfect record. 0 bombers lost to enemy fighters in over 200 escort missions. Individual pilots distinguish themselves. Captain Lee Archer, Lieutenant Roscoe Brown, Lieutenant Charles Brantley, and Lieutenant Clarence Lester all become aces, each credited with 5 or more aerial victories. Colonel Davis becomes one of the most respected commanders in the 15th Air Force, known for his tactical skill and leadership. The group receives numerous commendations, including a Distinguished Unit Citation for a mission on March 24, 1945. That's the Berlin mission. But even these honors are downplayed. When the war ends in May 1945, the 332nd is still in Italy. The pilots expect to return home as heroes. They've proven themselves in combat. They've exceeded every expectation. They've earned the respect of the bomber crews they protected. They expect recognition, parades, medals, acknowledgement of their service. What they get is silence. The Army begins demobilizing. Fighter groups are deactivated. Pilots are discharged. The Tuskegee Airmen return to the United States and face the same segregation they left. They cannot eat in most restaurants. They cannot stay in most hotels. They face discrimination when applying for jobs. Some try to continue flying careers. Airlines won't hire them. Corporate flight departments won't hire them. They are shut out of commercial aviation because of their race. Some become instructors at small flying clubs. Some leave aviation entirely. All of them carry the knowledge that they served their country with distinction, and their country still considers them second-class citizens. The historical record of their achievement is buried. The Army's official histories mention the 332nd briefly. The focus is on white fighter groups. The narrative of the air war emphasizes the exploits of famous white aces. The Tuskegee Airmen are footnotes. Their perfect record is not mentioned. The fact that they were the most requested escorts is not mentioned. The story of how they proved the Army's racial theories wrong is not mentioned. This erasure continues for decades. In the 1950s and 60s, books about World War II aviation barely mention the Tuskegee Airmen. When they are mentioned, the focus is often on the novelty of black pilots rather than their combat effectiveness. In 1954, the Air Force integrates. Racial segregation in the military is officially ended. Black pilots can now serve in any squadron. But the history of the Tuskegee Airmen remains obscure. The men themselves rarely speak about their service. Many feel frustrated about how they were treated. They proved themselves in combat and were still denied equality. Why talk about it? Who would listen? But slowly the story begins to emerge. Historians start interviewing surviving Tuskegee Airmen. Researchers dig through military records. The statistics become public. The perfect record. The 200 missions without losing a bomber. The fact that bomber crews specifically requested red-tail escorts. The evidence is overwhelming. The Tuskegee Airmen were exceptional. In 1995, a study by the Air Force Historical Research Agency confirms the 332nd's record. 0 bombers lost to enemy fighters during escort missions. This record is unique among American fighter groups in the European theater. The study is published and begins to circulate. Media attention follows. Journalists interview surviving Tuskegee Airmen. Their stories are told on television, in newspapers, in magazines. The American public learns what these men accomplished. In 2006, Congress awards the Tuskegee Airmen the Congressional Gold Medal, one of the highest civilian honors in the United States. President George W. Bush signs the legislation and presides over the award ceremony. Surviving Tuskegee Airmen attend, now in their 80s and 90s. They receive the recognition they should have received 60 years earlier. In 2007, a Hollywood film, Red Tails, brings their story to mainstream audiences. The film is not entirely historically accurate. It's a Hollywood production after all, but it introduces millions of people to the Tuskegee Airmen. Young people learn that black pilots flew in World War II. They learn about the perfect record. They learn about discrimination and excellence coexisting. The Tuskegee Airmen become part of the popular understanding of World War II. But by then, most of them are gone. They lived their lives, raised their families, worked their jobs, and passed away without the recognition they deserved. A few lived long enough to see their story told, to see the Congressional Gold Medal, to see the movie, to know that finally their service was acknowledged. Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. lived until 2002. He retired from the Air Force as a lieutenant general, one of the first black generals in the newly independent Air Force. He commanded fighter wings in Korea, served in staff positions, and eventually became the first black general to command an Air Force base. His career was distinguished, But he never forgot the discrimination he faced. In his memoirs, he wrote about his time at West Point, the silent treatment he endured for 4 years. He wrote about the skepticism and prejudice he encountered as commander of the 332nd. He wrote about the satisfaction of proving the doubters wrong. And he wrote about the frustration of not being recognized for what his men accomplished. Davis was awarded a 4th star posthumously in 1998, making him a full general. The promotion was honorary, recognizing his contributions to the Air Force and to racial integration. But it came too late for him to wear the rank. Lieutenant Colonel Lee Archer, one of the aces of the 332nd, lived until 2010. After the war, he became a successful businessman and remained active in the Tuskegee Airmen organization. He spoke frequently about his experiences, giving talks at schools and military bases. He emphasized that the Tuskegee Airmen succeeded not because they were better than white pilots, but because they were just as good and worked harder to prove it. He wanted young people to understand that excellence requires effort and that discrimination can be overcome through performance. Archer was initially credited with 4 aerial victories, one short of ace status. In 2008, after a review of combat records, he was officially credited with a 5th victory and recognized as an ace. He received the honor at a ceremony attended by Air Force leadership. He was 88 years old. Captain Charles McGee flew 136 missions with the Tuskegee Airmen. He continued his Air Force career after the war, flying missions in Korea and Vietnam. He retired as a colonel in 1973 with 409 combat missions, one of the highest totals of any American pilot. McGee lived to be 102 years old, passing away in 2022. He was one of the last surviving Tuskegee Airmen. In his final years, he spoke constantly about the importance of education and perseverance. He told young people that the Tuskegee Airmen succeeded because they refused to accept limitations. He said the lesson of the Red Tails is that excellence is not limited by race, gender, or background. It's limited only by effort and opportunity. The legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen extends far beyond their combat record. They proved that institutional discrimination was based on prejudice, not fact. They demonstrated that when given equal training and equipment, Black Americans could perform at the highest levels. They opened doors for future generations. The integration of the U.S. military, which began in 1948, was possible because the Tuskegee Airmen had proven that integration would not harm military effectiveness. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s drew on the example of black veterans who had served their country and demanded equality at home. The presence of black pilots in modern air forces, not just in America but around the world, can be traced back to the men who trained at Tuskegee. Every black astronaut, every black airline pilot, every black military aviator stands on the shoulders of the Red Tails. When bomber crews over Germany in 1944 and 1945 looked up and saw Red Tails, they felt relief. They knew they were protected. They knew they would make it home. The irony is that many of these white bomber crews, who might have grown up with prejudice, trusted black pilots with their lives. They saw firsthand that skill and courage have no color. Some of these bomber crew members went home after the war and became advocates for civil rights, influenced by their experiences with the Red Tails. Others returned to their communities and challenged assumptions based on what they had witnessed in combat. The Tuskegee Airmen changed minds not through rhetoric but through performance. The 332nd. Fighter Group's perfect record stands as one of the great achievements in military aviation history. 0 bombers lost to enemy fighters in over 200 escort missions. No other American fighter group in World War II achieved this. White fighter groups, with more resources, better aircraft initially, and without facing the burden of disproving racial stereotypes, could not match it. This is not to diminish the achievements of white fighter groups. They served bravely and effectively. But the Red Tails set a standard that was not equaled, and they did it while facing discrimination from their own military. They did it knowing that any failure would be attributed to their race. They did it without recognition or acknowledgement. They did it because it was their duty. That is the ultimate measure of professionalism and patriotism, to serve with excellence even when your service is not appreciated. Today, if you visit the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, you can see a P-51 Mustang painted with red tails. It sits in the World War II gallery surrounded by other aircraft from that era. The placard tells the story of the Tuskegee Airmen. It mentions the perfect record. It mentions Colonel Davis, Captain Archer, and other notable pilots. It mentions the Congressional Gold Medal. Visitors stop to read the placard and look at the aircraft. Many are learning this story for the first time. The Tuskegee Airmen are finally receiving the recognition they deserved 70 years ago. But recognition is not the same as justice. Justice would have been treating these men as equals from the beginning. Justice would have been acknowledging their achievements when they occurred. Justice would have been allowing them to continue their aviation careers after the war without facing discrimination. Recognition is better than nothing, but it cannot give back the years of frustration these men endured. It cannot restore the careers that were denied. It cannot compensate for the indignity of being treated as second-class citizens after proving themselves in combat. The story of the Tuskegee Airmen is ultimately a story about contradiction. America opposing fascism and racial supremacy while practicing racial discrimination at home. Black men serving freedom abroad while denied freedom at home. An army that needed pilots but refused to acknowledge that black men could fly. Bomber crews who trusted black pilots with their lives, but would not eat in the same restaurants with them after the war. These contradictions defined the Tuskegee experience, and these contradictions drove the men to excel. They knew that performance was their only weapon against prejudice. They knew that if they failed, the failure would be attributed to their race. They knew that if they succeeded, their success would be downplayed or ignored. And they succeeded anyway. Not for recognition, not for glory, but to prove a point. We can fly. We can serve. We are equal. And the bomber crews who flew under the protection of red tails knew it. The German pilots who learned to respect the red tails knew it. The statistics prove it. 0 bombers lost. 200 missions. The perfect record. That is the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen. Excellence in the face of adversity. Professionalism in the face of discrimination. Success when failure was expected. These men changed history. They proved that courage has no color. They opened doors that had been closed. They inspired generations. And they did it all while flying red-tailed Mustangs over Germany, protecting bombers, and proving that black Americans could do anything white Americans could do. They proved it in the only way that mattered. In combat, under fire, when lives were on the line. The red-tail angels. The bomber crew's guardian angels. The men who never lost a bomber. Remember their names. Remember their service. Remember that when the army said black men could not fly, these men flew anyway. When the army said black men could not serve in combat, these men served anyway. When the army said black men would fail, these men succeeded beyond expectations. That is the story of the Tuskegee Airmen. That is the story that was hidden for decades. That is the story that deserves to be told.